Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Parliament House. It is my privilege to get proceedings underway for this important event being hosted by Homelessness Australia. And obviously, this week we are talking about a range of different themes, one of which is ending First Nations homelessness, and another one is also collectively accepting the responsibility to try and end homelessness in Australia. It is a huge task. It is a task that if we don't do it, no one will. And it's also a task that requires a whole-of-government effort. And on that note, I'd like to acknowledge my friend, the Minister, Julie Collins, the Minister for Housing, for being with us here today. I also want to acknowledge Kate Colvin, the CEO of Homelessness Australia, and Kate and I were chatting in the airport last night, and I know how much effort Kate does and puts in not only for events such as this, but for the sector more broadly. And it's wonderful to see you here, and thank you so much for all of your work. There are a number of other people and other guests who will be speaking. I'm not going to go through everyone, but let me just say this before I hand over to Selina Walker. It is up to us, it is our responsibility, but more than that, I don't think we've ever been in a situation in Australia's history where there's ever been as much pressure on the housing sector as there is right now. This is probably the most difficult sector and present situation that we have ever seen in Australia. And the good news is that it's only going to become harder. And so the policy challenges and the policy decisions that we all make as members of Parliament, but also as leaders in the sector, have never been more important, and there's never been more riding on the efforts that we all make, from people who are able to own their own home all the way through our housing sector and spectrum for people who just need a roof over their head. So it is up to all of us to work extremely hard and to do everything that we can to provide as many homes for as many Australians as we possibly can. On that note, I also will acknowledge the Ngunnawal leader, who we're very privileged to have here with us today, Selina Walker, someone who understands profoundly the importance of having a home and for giving homes to other people and looking after our home as well. So would you please put your hands together for a welcome to country from Selina Walker. Thank you.
Thank you. Yuma, Galaganya Jolina Walker, Darawa Nona Darawa Nonawo. Hello, my name is Selina Walker and this is Ngunnawal country. I'd like to first start by acknowledging my elders, the Ngunnawal elders, and pay respect to my elders past, present and future. I'd also like to acknowledge the recent passing of my grandmother, Auntie Agnes Shea, who was the most senior Ngunnawal elder here and did a lot of work, particularly in this space. I want to acknowledge all the other Aboriginal and Torres people that are with us here this morning. Welcome my brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles. And I'd like to extend that to all our non-Indigenous friends that have joined us. Welcome. The Ngunnawal community are the traditional custodians of Canberra and the region. You may not be aware that the Ngunnawal nation is made up of several family groups and not just individuals who represent this country. Therefore, as a community, we have an elected body known as the United Ngunnawal Elders Council to represent us, along with the Aboriginal and Torres elected body of the ACT. This is important for you to understand and acknowledge, for our identity is a collective identity. There are other Indigenous and non-Indigenous people from around the nation, the country and the world who have come to live on Ngunnawal land. I would like to acknowledge and welcome you all. The tradition of welcoming the people to country is a practice that was handed down by our ancestors, old people and elders from the beginning of time. Before entering another person's country, you would first announce your arrival and not enter until the traditional owner formally welcomed you. The reason for this practice was to protect your spirit whilst in another person's country and also to show respect for the country which you are entering. It's wonderful to see this practice is now recognised and respected. I suppose it's not like entering into someone's home unless you're first invited. The Ngunnawal people, as within all Aboriginal people, have a great heritage that we'd like to share with all Australians from every walk of life. As you are aware, Canberra means meeting place. And Canberra has been a place of gathering for many Aboriginal tribes of Australia to come together to deal with important business and also for ceremonial purposes. And Ngunnawal ancestors believed in the importance of people gathering to build relationships, share knowledge and to celebrate the gift of heritage and history. We believe it's important for all to recognise our unique history and again an understanding that our land is our heritage and how loss of the land has disconnected so many Aboriginal people from their spiritual links, cultural heritage and identity. Reconciliation is not just a word, it is an action, and it's a human rights movement. We need people to join that human rights movement. As an Aboriginal person in this country, I've only been counted as a human being for 56 years. Let me repeat that while that sinks in. As a beautiful black Aboriginal person in Australia, I have only been counted as a human being for 56 years. I'm only 42. We are very young in our reconciliation journey, but we're on the right path. By incorporating proper cultural protocols like welcome to country, smoking ceremonies, etc., we are on the road to true reconciliation. I ask you to take a moment and think about how old you are, how old your children are, how old your elders are, and what you're doing to personally contribute to the reconciliation human rights movement. The upcoming referendum is an opportunity, another milestone for reconciliation. But the vote's going to affect me and it's going to affect you, but it's going to affect us both very, very differently. I'm not going to try and sway your vote, but I will say this. If we change nothing, nothing is going to change. Yous are here for change, for homelessness. If we change nothing in this country, nothing's going to change. I personally want change. I'm tired of burying my people. I'm tired of burying my kids. So I encourage you all to go out, get informed. Get your questions answered, get your concerns addressed. So come voting day, we can all make a fully informed decision with no regrets. I don't want my kids to come back to me in 10, 20 years' time and say, why didn't you vote this way? So as I said, go out, get informed, remembering that your vote is a national vote. So it's not just about what's happening in your own community or state. Your vote's going to impact the Western Australian mob, Northern Territory mob, Tasmanian mob. If you're not from here, it's going to affect me here in the ACT. So make sure you get out and find out what's happening in those communities as well before you make your fully informed decision. 65% of Australia has never met an Aboriginal person. We're doing something wrong. So watch out, because I'm going to organise a come and meet me session here in the ACT, because that's got to change. So thank you once again for inviting me here to do the Welcome to Country. I unfortunately can't stay for the rest of the event. I have left the 3-year-old with my mum, so I'm not quite sure who I'm rescuing. But don't underestimate the work that is done here, the conversations today, how they're going to impact. Housing in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities is a massive, massive issue, and it's got to be dealt with very differently. So well done to the organisers, well done to the people for coming here to the table to have that discussion and bring in their voices. And I'll now finish in the words of my people, the Ngunnawal people. Yumalandi Yunanga Yadabu Yungu, which means you may leave footprints on our land now. Or in other words, welcome to country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selena, for that welcome to country. Thanks to Josh for welcoming us to the room. And I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, to leaders emerging, and to the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining the conversation today. So, of course, we're here to not just acknowledge the overrepresentation of First Nations Australians amongst people without homes, but also to discuss how to address it. So I look forward to all the presentations on that topic today. But I want to particularly acknowledge our partners in hosting this event, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Association and Aboriginal Housing Victoria, and also acknowledge the wonderful work of Josh Byrne's office helping us to bring this together, Senator Pocock and his team, and other co-chair Angie Bell. I also want to thank you, all of you, for participating, both in the room and in the online audience. Welcome to you all. And can I particularly acknowledge the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Julie Collins, and the Aboriginal Social Justice Commissioner, June Oscar, who will share with us a pre-recorded presentation soon, and other guests in the room. So my name's Kate Colvin. I'm the CEO of Homelessness Australia. Homelessness Australia is the peak body for homelessness in Australia, and aside from working on advocacy to end homelessness, representing the homelessness sector and working to strengthen homelessness service delivery, we also coordinate Homelessness Week, which we're launching with this event today. So big shout out to all of the homelessness sector workers and homelessness sector organisations hosting events, but also for all of the work you do through the year. Homelessness continues to shock me every day because I think it's simply unacceptable in a rich country like Australia that we can continue to have the rates of homelessness that we do and that people lack the housing and support they need to have a home. But nothing is more shocking than the level of homelessness experienced by First Nations Australians and the impact that this has on every facet of community life and community wellbeing. We know that First Nations women and children are particularly impacted by this crisis, with homelessness making women's lives unsafe, making escape from violent homes more difficult, and thereby making interventions by child protection or interactions between First Nations children and the justice system more likely. So I don't want to take up a lot of time talking about these issues because we've got First Nations leaders here to talk to you about solutions to this problem. But I just want to confirm that ending First Nations homelessness is a top priority for Homelessness Australia, and we stand with our First Nations members and partners in the fight for change. So before I hand over to Ivan Simon, the CEO of NATSIA, who is co-chairing this event with me, can I first just introduce the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, Julie Collins, who will launch Homelessness Week. I want to thank the Minister for the energy and passion she so consistently demonstrates in her role as Minister for Homelessness and acknowledge the many new commitments to social housing and homelessness brought forward by her as Minister that will all make a difference to people without homes. We're particularly excited about the opportunity to achieve Homelessness Australia's mission of ending homelessness that's presented by the National Housing and Homelessness Plan. So, the Minister.
Thanks, Kate, and can I also thank Selena in her absence for that wonderful warm welcome to country and acknowledge traditional owners on whose land we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And similarly to all the people who are online today, looking at the screens here, there's actually a lot of people online, so I acknowledge your country from where you're online today as well. Josh Burns, obviously as one of the parliamentary co-chairs, Angie Bell and David Pocock in their absence for co-hosting this important parliamentary friends group, and to Kate and to Ivan for co-chairing today's event. Thank you very much. I also want to start by acknowledging all the workers in the homelessness sector and the dedicated staff. I know a number of you are in the audience today or online today, and I just want to say how much we value the incredible work you do, and we don't underestimate how difficult that task is and the situations that some of you are dealing with day by day. I want to thank Homelessness Australia for the important role that you play in that, Kate, and including coordinating of Homelessness Week and advocating for homelessness and for change, because we do need to improve the outcomes for those Australians who are at risk or who are experiencing homelessness. Today, as Kate has said, marks the start of Homelessness Week. It would be good if we didn't need a Homelessness Week, but sadly we do. Homelessness Week is a time for reflection and a time for this year's theme, it's time to end homelessness. Everyone gathered here today knows that Australia is facing a significant number of housing and homelessness challenges, with very real consequences for individuals and their families. Although the rate of people experiencing homelessness has remained relatively stable over the decade to 2021, based on the last census results, across Australia there are around 122,000 people experiencing homelessness. It is a number that we must bring down. We also have to remember what this number represents and remember who it represents. This number is made up of people, of sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, friends and families. We must continue to humanise these numbers so that we remind ourselves of the true cost of housing insecurity, because all Australians deserve a safe and secure, affordable place to call home. All Australians deserve this stability. Our government recognises the sad truth that for far too many Australians this is not a reality. It's why we're so passionate about creating real and lasting change. Change spearheaded by our ambitious policies that are designed to directly address the challenges of housing security in Australia. Policies designed in consultation and collaboration, particularly with states and territories and with the housing and homelessness sectors. To enact change that effectively targets the issues surrounding housing insecurity, the voices of those with lived experiences need to be heard also. It is for this reason that our government places a strong emphasis on collaboration. We're committed to providing safe, accessible and affordable housing so that more Australians have stability. For some communities, there are greater complexities to consider, and our government understands this. It's why we continue to involve stakeholders and those with lived experience in our policy-making discussions, because collaboration is an important way forward. This year's 2023 Homelessness Week program has a strong focus on First Nations people's lived experiences of housing insecurity. It will explore what challenges are affecting First Nations peoples experiencing homelessness, which will help inform how government approaches First Nations housing and homelessness policies. On the night of 2021 census, 24,930 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people were homeless. 1 in 5, or 20.4% of people experiencing homelessness that identified as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. These statistics emphasise the important role of government in continuing its focus on First Nations homelessness issues. Our government recognises the importance of country to First Nations people. This connection to country is important, and we heard that again this morning, and it underpins the social and emotional wellbeing of so many First Nations Australians. According to the AIHW, an estimated 74% of First Nations Australians aged 18 and over recognise their homelands or traditional country as an area of land with ancestral and cultural links. We also know a disconnect from country can negatively affect First Nations Australians, particularly felt by those experiencing housing insecurity. The disconnect from country, together with experiencing housing insecurity, negatively impacts First Nations' mental health and wellbeing. In the 2021-22 Specialist Homelessness Services annual report, around 28% of all clients were First Nations clients, and 31% of all nations' clients of specialist homelessness services reported experiencing mental health issues. This government is passionate about improving outcomes for First Nations Australians. We do want to drive real change. The 2023-24 budget invested $1.9 billion in initiatives for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and communities. Key areas of focus included building further community partnerships and the community-controlled sector, protecting traditional knowledge and culture, supporting economic opportunity through education, skills development and employment, better care for long and healthy lives, strengthening efforts to end family violence and support for the plan for a better, safer future for Central Australia. The government has also committed several initiatives to support First Nations peoples experiencing housing insecurity. One of these initiatives is our commitment to allocate $200 million in disbursements from the Housing Australia Future Fund for the repair, maintenance and improvements of housing in remote Indigenous communities. This funding will provide support to improve housing security in remote First Nations communities. Our government has also invested $111.7 million into a new one-year partnership with the Northern Territory Government to accelerate the building of new remote housing. This investment is targeted at addressing the worst overcrowding in the country. The government is also investing $9.2 million over 3 years to establish the Housing Policy Partnership to provide a forum for shared decision-making between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and governments on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing and homelessness policies and programs. And I look forward to again meeting First Nations representatives of the Housing Policy Partnership shortly and hearing their perspectives on ways to tackle the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing and homelessness issues. Because when governments listen to communities, on the ground, they make better decisions, get better results and deliver better value for money. I reiterate our government's commitment to the Uluru Statement from the Heart and the Voice to Parliament, which will be critical to ongoing consultation. Our government is investing in communities because we want to make practical and effective change that truly addresses the issue of housing insecurity for First Nations Australians. We want our goal for secure housing for all Australians to become a reality. It's clear that social housing supply has not kept up with Australia's growing population, with the proportion of social housing households falling from 4.6% in 2014 to 4.1% in 2022. We recognise that this is but one of numerous factors which underpin the housing insecurity across Australia. To address these factors, our government is taking a holistic approach that aims to strengthen in a range of areas across housing and homelessness policies. The Housing Australia Future Fund is a key part of our government's ambitious agenda to improve housing outcomes and reduce housing insecurity in Australia. The fund will be the largest Commonwealth investment in affordable and social housing in more than a decade. It will help tens of thousands of Australians in need of housing security to build a better life and to fulfil their full potential. As many of you know, the fund is estimated to deliver 30,000 new social and affordable dwellings, with 4,000 of those homes reserved for women impacted by family and domestic violence and older women at risk of homelessness. The funding is just one example of our broad and ambitious approach to housing and security. Our housing agenda also includes the $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator to deliver thousands of new social homes across Australia in more parts of our country. The National Housing Accord, which includes federal funding to deliver another 10,000 affordable rental homes over 5 years from 2024, to be matched by the states and territories with another 10,000. Increasing the maximum rate of Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, the largest increase in more than 30 years. An additional $2 billion in financing for the National Housing Finance Investment Corporation for more social and affordable rental housing. The $575 million that we unlocked immediately for more social and affordable homes when we came to office. The $1.7 billion extension to the National Housing and Homelessness Agreement with the states for that one extra year, including $67.5 million boost to homelessness funding. We've of course got the states and territories committing to improve renters' rights through the National Cabinet and the Housing and Homelessness Ministerial Council. We've formed the interim National Housing Supply and Affordability Council while we wait for the legislation to go through, and it's already begun its work to deliver independent advice to government. The National Cabinet's decision to re-establish the Housing and Homelessness Ministerial Council, and we've already had 4 meetings in just over a year. These are significant changes, but they'll deliver positive and practical outcomes for those that need it most. The development of a National Housing and Homelessness Plan is also a testament to our government's commitment to improve housing outcomes and to ensure more Australians have a safe place to call home. The plan will set out a shared vision on tackling the country's housing challenges across the responsibilities of different levels of government. It will aim to deliver lasting change together with states and territories for Australians facing housing challenges, setting out short, medium and long-term reforms needed to improve outcomes across the entire housing spectrum, from homelessness and rental stress right through to home ownership. The plan will not shy away from the significant challenges in the sector, but face them head-on, identifying actions that can be taken to help improve the housing landscape in Australia. We know we cannot achieve this alone. We want to work together with other tiers of government, with the sector. But we must also engage in a meaningful consultation with those on the front line of housing and homelessness services, experts in the sector, and importantly, as I said earlier, people with lived experience of housing insecurity. We're ready to listen to help shape a vision to guide future development of this policy in Australia. Today, we enter the next phase of making our plan a reality. I'm very pleased to announce from today we're releasing the issues paper for the National Housing and Homelessness Plan. This release formally commences the public consultation and the stakeholder engagement needed to develop this plan. Acknowledging the housing and homelessness challenges we currently face, the issues paper is a resource to promote discussion and provide guidance for people and organisations in formulating submissions. It's important to note the issues outlined in the issues paper are not exhaustive, but they're rather a broad overview of the issues and challenges across the sector, from homelessness to housing, across responsibilities of all tiers of government. The issues paper seeks views on areas including homelessness prevention, early intervention and services, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander housing, social housing and home ownership. Through considering a range of perspectives on these and other areas, my goal is for the plan to provide a better understanding of the current state of housing and homelessness in Australia and the drivers of homelessness and housing insecurity throughout urban, regional, rural and remote Australia. And most importantly, my ambition for the plan is to set out strategies for how all levels of government can work more effectively together with the sector in the private and community sector to better support people experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity. Consultations on the issues paper will open today and will run until the 22nd of September 2023. So over the next 6 weeks, the Australian public, stakeholders are all invited to share their stories, their experiences and, importantly, their expertise. It's only through extensive collaboration that we can ensure that the plan is a shared national vision and a strategy for how we can better support those that need it most. We want to hear from as many people as possible. I strongly encourage everyone here and online to contribute, as this feedback will be invaluable in helping us understand We also want members of parliament in their local communities to contribute. The government is committed to improving housing outcomes for Australians, ensuring more Australians have a safe, secure, affordable place to call home. Continued consultation with stakeholders across states and territories will assist us, together with the states and territories, to make real change for those facing housing insecurity. That's why I'm so excited to launch the next steps in the development of the National Housing and Homelessness Plan here with you today. As the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, I also feel privileged to be here and to hear from you on your discussions about how the government is creating and can create change. As many of you know, it is an issue I feel very passionately about, because all Australians deserve a safe and secure place to call home. Thank you.
So now I'll just hand over to Ivan Simon, who will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Kate. Just quickly, and thank you, Minister. You might have to head back down to Parliament. Can I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we're meeting today, and also other MPs and senators that are in the room today, and all their staff, who I've got to meet over the last 6 or 7 weeks. I think I can walk through this building blindfolded. Before I used to get lost, mainly to try and get that legislation through, which we're working hard to get through, and you'll hear why in the next few meetings. But you know, it's a really important thing, this issue that is affecting our people, and who better to talk to that a bit around the national environment as well, or international environment, than June Oscar AO, Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner of the Australian Human Rights Commission, who's going to talk to us about those issues, as well as findings from a report and a national summit relating to homelessness, and the intersections with women and girls' safety and broader family and community well-being. And then I'll have a little bit to talk about, we know, a whole 10 minutes to squash in hundreds of years of neglect. But anyway, I'll do my best. As soon as we get the technology right, we'll just hand straight over to June Oscar. I also prepared a presentation for something else, but I was going to use a bit for here, which talks about the United Nations declarations on the rights of Indigenous people, which was back in 2007. And it's interesting to revisit those, and I urge you, if you don't look at it often, go back and have a look at it, because he talks about those sort of things that that's, I guess, in the forefront of discussions at the moment around the Voice to Parliament, around things that we believe will be a positive step towards our people having a say in our lives, our people being listened to, being engaged with, and in particular us taking more control over our lives through more strategies that address those issues. And we don't expect them to be done overnight. We do understand it takes a lot of resourcing, and of course the system, political system that we have to work with is a challenge in itself. Obviously, you've got 3 levels of government, which none of their political timeframes enhance each other. They're all at different times, and so we have to continue to work with different governments. Bureaucrats generally stay the same for most of the time, but when they get too close to us, I think they get moved on a bit too, because they're getting too friendly with us. But we've met all those challenges, and we continue to do that, and it's good to see a government now that is not, because we used to get a lot of responses to say, oh, well, that's a state and territory responsibility, but we now have a government consistent with, many years ago, the referendum that gave the responsibility back to the Australian government, and we reminded the new government coming in that we want you to, yes, it's a state and territory responsibility around social and affordable housing, but we want you to take leadership And I can see that this government's trying to do that. And we don't expect to get, as I said, all of the issues dealt with immediately, but we've got to start a process. And it's good that the Minister has launched the discussion paper, and I urge you to respond to that. And if you need any points of clarification, Natsia will be able to provide some of that for you. We don't want to over-influence your submission, but certainly we can clarify a number of things for you in that regard. You would have noticed recently the Productivity Commission interim report on the Close the Gap process, and yet again that is clearly demonstrating that there's a hell of a lot for us to do. And I just last week in Brisbane met with states and territories and our Secretariat of the Coalition of Peaks and some of our leaders in the Coalition of Peaks, and we talked to them about the report as much as we could to encourage them to see it not as a negative process but more a positive thing to help the bureaucracies in the states and the territories to do better with our help and with our involvement. We're there to help make things better. And when you get a chance to read that draft report, you will see what I'm talking about there, about there's still a long, long way to go. You know, bureaucracies in particular not just need to walk the walk, but they need to talk the talk as well, and do the both together, not just bits and pieces of it. So it was a very interesting report, and it's probably timely for the things that we need to do. It's hard yards ahead of us for all, and there's no easy answer. You know, whilst we were hoping to give some leadership to some ways that we can work on in today's activity, a couple of the things that we have put in a number of submissions way back to the Close the Gap refresh process a few years ago was that we want, as a national body and our sector, our Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community-controlled organisations and our communities as well, and our tenants and families, we want to make sure that we're recognised in any new national strategy. And we've made that strong, so we've been making that position strong for quite a while now, and we haven't changed from that. We also want to make sure that we have our own national strategy as well, that's very specific to our sector and our communities, which we don't expect that any national new strategy, housing and homelessness strategy will necessarily pick up in detail. So we'll certainly pick up that in detail. And while I'm saying that, we've also been pushing with the Minister and the government to have a separate stream of what we call supplementary funding. So in terms, what we mean is, so we expect that the mainstream strategy will pick up a lot of our issues, but it won't pick up all of them. It might only, if we're lucky, get to 50% of a lot and needs over time. So we need a supplementary funding program where we can actually make a difference, especially around those levels of disadvantage that are and the indicators in the Close the Gap targets. So where we can make decisions with our state and territory jurisdictions and our community-controlled organisations to say, well, whilst that might not have the highest level of housing need per se, but it has a high level of domestic violence or child safety or whatever, and we need to supplement that with some new housing supply that can make an impact on that. So we've been talking a lot about that we need quite urgently as well in the process. So that's a quick 10 minutes of what we're trying to achieve, but at least we're there in with government today, and we're progressing into state and territory governments with the help of our 3 national peaks that are established, and we're establishing them in others, and we have very strong relationship with National Chair, National Shelter and Homeless Australia, just to name a few, which has been really beneficial. So Have we got June?
Yes, it's going to work
that.
now.
Okay.
Jalangurumāningare, Palangare. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to Homelessness Australia, the Aboriginal Housing Victoria and the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Association for bringing us together to this event during National Homelessness Week. I'm so sorry I cannot be with you in person today. I've been attending and travelling to and from Gama, and I wish I could be with you all because there is barely a more pressing discussion needed right now than how to secure our fundamental human right to adequate, healthy, safe, habitable, and sustainable housing. There could not be a more prescient moment to be holding this event on housing and homelessness, to be having these conversations about the way forward. We are in the midst of a very serious housing crisis, as we all know. Australia and the globe, in fact. The idea of the quarter-acre block for the family has become a far-off Australian dream, if ever it was really attainable or sustainable. It is no longer so much the idea of home ownership that occupies people's minds. Rather, it is how to find any adequate place to live, where the rent will not be so exorbitant that it will still allow for you to buy food and pay for electricity and anything else that's needed for some sort of reasonable standard of living. Even this basic need and right seems like a far-off dream for many. I don't need to remind you all that the right to housing is a human right, but I will underscore it with reminding us of what that actually means. The right to housing and an adequate standard of living is set out in a number of international human rights instruments. The UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights has clarified that housing should not be interpreted in a narrow or restrictive way, but should be considered in a broader sense as the right to live somewhere in security, peace and dignity. This is exactly what we heard throughout the national engagements for We Yaniyu Dangani, meaning women's voices, which I undertook throughout 2018, talking to over 2,000 First Nations women and girls, meeting them where they lived, in their communities all across this country. Women spoke of housing alongside and within conversations about what it means to feel safe, healthy and engaged in all of life. Housing for so many of our people is about creating homes on your traditional country and within communities. It is the cornerstone of creating safe and secure attachments to the places we belong and culturally rich and nourishing lives. It is more than just having a roof, a shelter, to exist and survive. It is about what surrounds us and how that shelter, our homes, integrates into the familial, the communal, social, economic, and cultural existences that we want to live within. Housing should be seen within a holistic framework of how societies can flourish and thrive. The housing crisis in Australia, a consequence of decades of neglect of investing in adequate, affordable and social housing, has completely undermined the idea that housing is about belonging. The full brunt of the housing crisis has also hit at the issues about, but also show just how interconnected all the facets of our lives are and how dependent we are on global patterns and changes. The full brunt of the housing crisis has hit at the time of multiple compounding crises, which intersect and worsen our housing issues. There is, of course, the immediate issue of the cost of living, rising food and energy bills, which we are all feeling the pain of. There are the entrenched systemic issues of discrimination, that frequently lock women, people of colour, those from minority groups, young people, old people, single people, anyone that doesn't fit the standard idea of a wealthy bachelor or nuclear family out of the housing market. There is the terrible national crisis of family violence that either forces women and children to be trapped in dangerous situations or left homeless because there is nowhere to go and nowhere affordable. And there is, of course, the climate crisis, or global boiling, as the UN termed it the other day, which seemed always on the horizon and has now hit with full force. The increasing frequency of weather disasters like floods, fires, and consecutive days and months of extreme heat, particularly in Northern Australia, have left so many Australians either languishing in totally inadequate housing or homeless because of unprecedented flooding in the Fitzroy Valley. I am one of those left homeless, but I highly doubt that my family and I have been captured in our inadequate national data about housing and homelessness. The reality is, particularly in remote regions, that we do not know how many people are homeless. We know there is gross overcrowding, which is an indicator of homelessness, but our data is inadequate, and there is always a huge undercount of our people in every census. We simply do not know our real housing needs. It is clear that we do not have an adequate housing system in Australia that can resolve past issues with housing and can respond to very pressing present and future issues. Increasingly, Australians are becoming aware that access to adequate housing and a good standard of living is premised on the market and intergenerational wealth, not on human rights. This, of course, has been long understood by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples since the moments of invasion when the continent, our home, was violently and mythically transformed into terra nullius. It was systemically divided into individualised property parcels, laying the ideological foundations for a marketised housing system, severed from the land and a sense of an integrated belonging with the surrounding environment. We know the consequences of the total imposition of this system across the continent. Fundamentally, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been locked out of the private housing market. And in recent decades, with dwindling stocks of social housing and a failure to invest effectively in remote housing, the majority of which is social housing on forms of communal land tenure, so many of our peoples, our women, children and families, have been left living in appalling conditions. It is no surprise, given this living history, that in every engagement for we Yaniyu Dangani, housing was at the forefront of women's priorities. They saw it as an area that had been totally neglected by policymakers, and that the housing design, construction, supply, maintenance and support system was in drastic need of an overhaul. I will not reel off the statistics about housing associated issues. These are easily Googleable. During the engagements, we saw the face of the numbers associated with systemic neglect. Women were living with large families in houses where doors and windows were broken, holes in the walls, and no air conditioning. We saw one family who lived in a shed. There was many reports of raw sewage and exposed wiring, along with many other hazards. And most of this dilapidated housing were located in the hottest parts of Australia, under the management of state and territory governments. It is not hard to understand that these conditions fuel and compound a range of other issues, such as a range of poor physical and mental health issues. I heard stories of severely overcrowded housing where women were caring for multiple family members, often with complex needs, dividing their income up to support everyone while attempting to pay rent and energy, causing a heavy stress burden. Women described households with high rates of unemployment because of a lack of job opportunities, contributing to disengagement, despair, and high rates of drug and alcohol use. This toxic mix could frequently lead to violence against women and children, and time again we heard there was nowhere to escape to. We also heard how this causes children to roam the streets in groups at night, to stay away from unsafe households, or to go in search of food. The complex web of problems caused by poor housing is ever expanding and intricate. Ultimately, women attributed all of these issues to a system's failure of not investing in housing and not appreciating that housing is a fundamental part of our cultural lives, as well as community, social, economic, and regional development. Many women, particularly in remote areas, spoke positively and powerfully to a time when housing was considered a part of regional development, when the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, ATSIC, was functioning, and how it supported the growth of Indigenous community-controlled housing organisations. These organisations on the ground, working for and with our peoples and regions, frequently integrated the construction and maintenance of housing with local employment, economic opportunities, and the growth of communities on traditional country. When ATSIC was abolished in 2005, our community housing organisations gradually lost funding, and I have no doubt you could track worsening housing conditions alongside the loss of local and regional housing advocacy and development. You can go to the Wee Yaniu Dangani 2020 report tabled in Federal Parliament and read about this all in the housing and homelessness chapter. The loss of ATSIC as a national representative body for our peoples was a terrible setback, which we are still suffering from. A permanent Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice enshrined in the Constitution could not be abolished at the stroke of a pen. It would always be able to advocate and advise for what is needed on the ground. It would change lives on the ground. It would release us from the short-term policy cycles and failures and help our nation commit to long-term self-determined development on the ground. Another decade of poor housing policy is another generation lost to deplorable conditions and horrific health outcomes, all tied to intergenerational ramifications. These are extreme human rights issues that we are dealing with, associated and interrelated with housing. And the voice is a significant national mechanism that can begin the pathway to resolving them. The time is now for a bold reimagining of housing in Australia that can deal with present issues while forming sustainable and properly habitable and healthy communities, which is so necessary to navigating and combating climate change. And this reimagining can begin by seeing housing through a First Nations lens as about belonging to country and the surrounding environment. It is time to reinvest in housing through a holistic approach, and the ongoing work of Wiyaniutangani provides an excellent framing to do this. So please keep track of the development of the National Plan for Action and the Institute for First Nations Gender Justice and Equality at the Australian National University, both due to be launched in March 2024, both likely to incorporate housing and livable and sustainable communities as a primary focus. I really look forward to hearing the outcomes of this event and look forward to engaging with many of you during this momentous referendum year. And please remember that history is calling. History is calling on each and every one of us. I wish you well for the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jen. That was really worth waiting for. What a wonderful lady she is. Can I, because we're running a little bit behind, can I now introduce you to Darren Smith, who's the Chair of the Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Forum in Victoria, and he's the CEO of Aboriginal Housing Victoria. He's a Palawa man from Tasmania, and he'll speak today about a blueprint for an Aboriginal-specific homelessness system in Victoria. Thank you, Darren. And we'll welcome Darren.
Thanks, Simon. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal people, their elders past and present on lands that have never been ceded, and thank Selena for her welcome to country today. Serena raised an important point about change. How do we create the right change that makes a difference to eliminate Aboriginal homelessness? I'd like to follow up on that theme today. Good morning. My name's Darren Smith. I am a Palawa man from Tasmania and the chair of the Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Forum in Victoria, which is the 36 Aboriginal community-controlled organisations involved in providing community housing and homelessness services to the Aboriginal people in Victoria. I'm also the CEO of Aboriginal Housing Victoria. I'd also like to acknowledge Minister for Housing Julia Collins, Josh Burns, Chair of the Friends in Parliament for Housing, our co-chairs Kate Colvin, CEO of Homelessness Australia, and Ivan Simon, the CEO of NATSIHA, and acknowledge the powerful words of June Oscar and those to come from Tina Ugal. Distinguished guests and Aboriginal leaders in the room, people living across Australia are facing a housing crisis which continues to grow at a concerning pace. No group in Australia feels a housing crisis more than Aboriginal people, who are experiencing homelessness at 10 times the rate of the broader population. I'd like to talk today about the collective action required to eliminate Aboriginal homelessness, using as an example the action we are taking in Victoria. In Victoria, Manana Warnti and Marta Court, or the Victorian Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Framework, was developed in 2020 by community for community and sets out cultural principles and a clear vision that every Aboriginal person has a home. To achieve this vision, the framework has 5 key objectives. Achievement of the vision requires action against all objectives. Importantly, today I'll discuss the objective to create an Aboriginal-focused homelessness system. Manana Warnti and Marta Court identifies the importance of targets to drive change and effort in areas that are essential to improving housing outcomes. This includes embedding Aboriginal targets in all relevant mainstream policies, legislation, strategies and programs, strong housing targets in the National Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Agreement, and relevant legislation such as the Housing Australia Future Fund and mechanisms such as the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. The most critical reform targets for addressing homelessness, for addressing homelessness in Victoria are reducing the rates of Aboriginal homelessness by 10% per annum, compounding for 10 years, 5,000 plus additional social housing units in Victoria for Aboriginal people by 2036, ensuring Aboriginal people receive a proportionate share of new social housing allocations. Compared to other Australians, Aboriginal Victorians are 10 times more likely to require social housing, 10 times more likely to contact homelessness services, with 44% of Aboriginal Victorians entering the homelessness system homeless. 76% of Aboriginal people accessing homelessness services have been there before in the recent past. Next one. The Aboriginal Housing and Homelessness Forum, in partnership with Homes Victoria, identified 10 key issues with the homelessness system. These issues relate to how the system treats and supports Aboriginal clients. The key issues are functions of the services, the systems, and how services share information and work together, as well as weaknesses in Aboriginal self-determination within the system. Aboriginal organisations who know best how to support Aboriginal people are under-resourced and their funding is grossly inadequate. Next one. It was clear that attempting to solve each of the current challenges separately will not move the dial on over-representation of Aboriginal people experiencing homelessness. It requires a fresh approach, starting from a holistic and systems perspective. The design of Aboriginal homelessness reforms in Victoria is captured in the blueprint for an Aboriginal specific homelessness system. The blueprint reconceptualises homelessness services into a system and is guided by an overarching vision and guiding principles. The blueprint identifies 3 important objectives: building an Aboriginal homelessness system from the ground up, providing tailored support for those at risk, increasing the supply of crisis and transitional housing. In developing the blueprint, key stakeholders articulated that open entry points are critically important to building an Aboriginal homelessness system. This system cannot be achieved unless there is investment in developing a network of capable and resourced Aboriginal community-controlled organisations across Victoria, which serve as the front door into the Aboriginal-specific homelessness service system. These front doors, or open entry points, ensure that Aboriginal people are met with culturally safe, welcoming and warm environment when entering the homelessness system, and then rapidly receive integrated housing and support services. Not yet. Almost. The services provided must be culturally appropriate, wrap-around Aboriginal-specific services. This includes support to meet their needs and navigate the complexities of the system, including housing, mental health, justice, dealing with Centrelink and so on. Enduring services and ongoing support is required when exiting the homelessness system and transitioning into longer-term housing. This will prevent re-entry into the homelessness system and build capacity to sustain tenancies and increase uptake of private rental and ultimately, hopefully, home ownership. The blueprint includes the system enablers that we expect. What is distinctly different is the concept of stewardship in a lead Aboriginal agency. The Aboriginal System Steward supports a place-based approach to management, package allocation and monitoring, with shared decision-making through devolved or local commissioning tables. Importantly, the planning and management of supports and housing is integrated and underpinned by a dynamic approach to managing supply and demand. The key to the blueprint is that it provides a high-level design to build an Aboriginal-focused homelessness system accompanied by a place-based reform process. Achieving the end goal requires long-term commitment and investment. Next one. In closing, for me, today is a reminder that homelessness is not okay. there is no doubt that there is an Aboriginal homelessness crisis in this country. Aboriginal homelessness only ends when every Aboriginal person has a home. That's easy to say, but achieving it will require sustained, focused and resourced effort. By talking about Victorian approaches, Mananawarnti and Marta Court and the blueprint, I've tried to show what might be required to make long-term change, to outline approaches that might usefully inform national and jurisdictional approaches to eliminate Aboriginal homelessness. Thank you for your time and for listening.
Thank you, Darren. That's a lot to go through in a very short period of time, but let me assure you that Aboriginal Housing Victoria are really showing strong leadership in our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community-controlled housing sector, and it's great to have them on board, and they're part of our board as well. In addition to our next speaker, who I think is online.
Yes.
Tina Ugal, and I think we also have Leonie Pickett with her as well. Tina is Managing Director of Noongar Mia Mia, is a proud Noongar Yorga woman from Ballandong and Neward with Wajak connections in WA as well, and is passionate about growing cultural understanding in the housing sector. Leonie Pickett is also from similar or the same mob as well, and she's working in Indigenous affairs in the Kimberley region and around in Perth. So welcome Leonie and Tina.
So kaya everyone. I'd like to give my respect to the Ngunnawal people, the elders past and present. So I'm the Managing Director of Noongar Maya Maya, and I have been for nearly 6 years. Noongar Maya Maya is an Aboriginal community housing provider, which has been at the front line of Aboriginal social housing for over 2 decades. We provide supportive housing, which addresses homelessness, risk factors from a place of cultural and personal respect. So kind of what I'm going to quickly talk about is kind of what Darren, we've all got the same kind of thinking, the Aboriginal community housing providers. At any given time, we house up to 380 people with over 91 tenancies. Currently, we have 100 properties. We're the only Aboriginal metropolitan community housing provider in Perth. We ensure that they have the right supports in place to understand their rights and responsibilities as tenants, and to also overcome the mental and physical health impacts associated with experiences of homelessness and poverty. And we try to open up new chapters in their lives. With secure housing and support from a strong and caring Aboriginal organisation, our tenants and their families can identify and achieve their potential. Stable, secure housing is the first steps towards a better future for our people, but housing alone is not enough. Whole of person, culturally appropriate approaches are critical to address the factors that lead to homelessness and support our people to exit homelessness permanently and to build solid futures. Our families are supported holistically, and it's built from an authentic relationship from the core, the heart. It's practical, flexible, creative, respectful, compassionate and kind. And each tenant has and client has a unique circumstance. I did want to show a quick video, but before we do that, I think that's only like 5 minutes. We have we have WA's first Aboriginal housing first support service called Murichmaya, which means strong home, which demonstrates self-determination and action. We launched in mid-21 as a result of a partnership between 2 ACCOs, ourselves and Wanjaning Aboriginal Court, and we've been funded by the state government for 5 years. And this program builds on the evidence-based cultural approach, of the 2 leading organisation, as well as deep insight developed over 5 decades between us, working with the Aboriginal community on Noongar Budja. So what I am trying to kind of say is that working in a culturally secure, effective way with Aboriginal people, and particularly here in Noongar Budja, facing homelessness means working differently, and it means putting Aboriginal cultural values at the front and centre of the way we work, and it also means involving Aboriginal people meaningfully in the design and delivery of the services, and understanding where to step back and let Aboriginal people lead the way. Just sort of I've done a little video with the resources that we have, sort of talking to some of our tenants and clients under the Muditch Maya, and I thought it'd be really nice just to sort of, showing people talking, have a little quick video.
Founded in 2000, Noongar Maya Maya is an Aboriginal owned and managed community housing company located in Perth, Western Australia. Noongar Maya Maya provides quality social and affordable rental accommodation exclusively for Indigenous people and their families, while offering individualised cultural tenancy support to help our tenants to manage their tenancies. Noongar Maya Maya is more than a landlord. We're an Aboriginal community-controlled organisation working for our community and from our courts, our hearts.
We think it's important for Noongar people and Aboriginal people on Noongar Budja to have access to Noongar tenancy support workers working in Noongar ways. That's why we started the Bullimore Tenancy Support Program, which is all about dignity, respect and choices, making sure our voices are heard.
Noongar Maya Maya is very important. I worked with so many agencies that pretty much just threw their hands up in the air and said they couldn't help. I think there's probably a lot of families out there going through the same thing that I'm going through, and Noongar Maya is the only one in southwest WA that could help me. I don't know really where I would be if Noongar Maya didn't step in. I'd probably be still couch surfing with the kids.
There's no better feeling than having your own, having my kids stable just to go to school. They're little simple things, Having their own room, just, my kids are 10 times happier than where we was. No better feeling than having our own place, and honestly, struggles that we went through to just, I've moved in with nothing. My mama helped with everything. Kids even got clothes, pillows, sheets, blankets. You even helped with, the food just to get us out of that situation. And honestly, I don't know what we would have done.
If you follow what's in here, I reckon I'll be on the streets. But what Maya does, it's unbelievable. And there for everyone, not only me, for everyone. And when I got a house with you, Mob, it was good. You helped me a lot. You done everything for me. Looked after me. You might say you fed me. I never looked back.
We are committed to operating under the Noongar Housing First principles, grounded in the concept of doinch cooling, going along together and building strong relationships throughout the journey from homelessness to secure, stable and culturally safe housing.
I'll go on mute and I'll pass you over to Leonie. I'm just going to give a bit of an insight into the homelessness outreach program we have.
So I actually coordinate the Muditch Maya Aboriginal Housing First program. We have a staffing of about 7 caseworkers. All of our caseworkers are basically, none of them have any official white-fella degrees. So they're on the ground, they're Aboriginal people working with our homeless mob. And we do act and we do all of our work under our Noongar Housing First principles. It has been a bit of a journey, but we've had a lot of successes. We've been able to house quite a few. Our guys, in our caseworkers, are very resourceful and have been able to, kind of connect into a number of other agencies in an attempt and put our case forward to find housing, as well as being able to go into Noongar Maya Maya stock. I guess the key with the success for Muditch is Aboriginal people working with our mob. That's really that for us. That I think that's worked really well, and it reflects on the successes that we've had. I think 29. We've housed about 29 people over the past 2.5 years, and like I said, 7 caseworkers, at times 5 caseworkers, and up to 64. We call them our mob, but they are clients of ours. And yeah, we provide that wraparound service once, during, before, huge advocacy. And once they're housed, we continue to provide that support. So,
an example.
Well, I guess there is an example. A lady off country, but has been here a number of years, and she's unable to return to her community. A huge trauma around her life situation. Always been abused financially, sexually, all of that stuff, and has had, she's her substance of choice is alcohol, and she has very poor health. During one horrible winter here in Perth, we got a call from one of the shires to say, she's a well-known person. She has, she's sleeping on the streets. So we went out, got hold of her, put her in some respite in the beginning, just to help her out with her health. A lot of DV, but we supported her and her fellow. So we didn't actually separate them, because she relied on her partner's help for a number of things. Anyway, we supported both of them, brought her into the fold. Noongar housed. We found somewhere to house her under the Noongar housing stock. Put her in a 1-bedroom unit of her own. Her health kind of improved a little bit. However, because she was such a pushover, we had the usual overcrowding. We had other homeless people going in and staying at her house. The team would have to go in so often to say, hey, you can't stay with this lady because, it's affecting her health. Her place in the house, the food, all of that stuff. So every now and again we'd go in and then, remove the people that were staying there. She still had huge health issues. But I guess, we just stayed with her and worked with her and continually worked with her, helped clean her, her house when it, other people had been there, and it's quite a bad situation. Eventually, we had to talk her through the realisation that she was unable to look after herself and be an independent person. So she was really against that. However, slowly, we kept talking to her and saying, it'd be good for you to go into a supported living environment that's, you can get medical help and as well as, food, everything that will be there. And she did fight a little bit, but eventually we were able to get her into that. And this lady is there now. Her health has improved. She's put on weight. And even though she still, gets out and she communicates with her mob down in the parks, it has, for us, it's been a huge success story. And she's still there. She still rings us now and again. We visit her, and that's what we've done, I guess, in that respect. So that's one of the huge success stories we've had. So yeah, that's us in a nutshell. Really, like I said, I think it's really important that Aboriginal people support Aboriginal people, because we know more where, you know.
Yeah, I think just in closing, you know, it's extremely vital for non-Indigenous organisations to build relationships with Aboriginal people and organisations, you know, that who can co-design programs and services with you. You need to include us from the very beginning. Listen to us, respect and incorporate our worldview, and also our spirituality, because we're connected, you know, and just our desires. And I think that's the first start, and I think it'll be very successful because we know how to service our mob. We know the issues. So, I think that's about it from me, Kate.
Thanks, Tina and Lani. That's great. Can we all... We're going to be evicted right on 12:30. I understand we're not even going to get a 90-day no grounds notice. But anyway, that's the way the system works these days. But it's been fantastic with the time that we've had. And I'd also like to thank everyone for coming, as well as the MPs and senators that have been coming in and out. And that bell that rings, that tells them they've got to rush for the lift and get down. There's a division. So it's been really good, and it'd be great if we had a few more of these, particularly where we can showcase our sector like we've done today, because we want to get the message out there clear to everyone that we do have providers in our system that can get great outcomes if they're given the chance and the opportunity, as Tina was just saying and as Darren was talking about. So we've got quite large organisations and we've got quite small ones, and we've got a lot in between, and they're struggling from time to time with the reform agendas that have been rolled out and stuff. So what I can say, whilst we don't have a positive outcome as yet with the HAF, but we've met with all the political parties, and one thing that we do get strongly is that they all have strong beliefs around our issues and our needs, and they're trying their best to address them over time, hopefully. A couple of things that came out of that for me, and Kate might have a couple of other things that we really need, and June also, about having a system that meets our needs in our communities, in our organisations, and in particular where it protects our women and children as well, where the severe levels of overcrowding and homelessness is not helping at all. So we need to, sooner we can get more housing supply into our communities, and not necessarily those locations that are informed by government bureaucracies in each state and territory. It needs to be informed by our own data and information about those issues, because far too often that we respond to the generic data that's either from the ABS and the census information or from the supply and demand issues from a state government perspective, but most of their properties are in locations that are not on our community's country or anything. So there's, as far as we're concerned, there's a total mismatch between supply and demand, let alone the total lack of investment over a long period of time. So there's been some big programs that have come and gone, but if we don't continue with the investment and support for sustainability of our sector, but more so our communities, we're going to keep going backwards and trying to catch up and fix up our properties and all that sort of stuff. So we need, and I keep pushing for a bipartisan approach here in this place over 20, 30 or even 40 years if we can, because that way I reckon that we will really make an inroad to the issues challenges that we're facing. Kate, did you pick up any other clear message that I might have missed or we might have missed in the process before we close off?
I think just the main thing is that when we start the question with how do we specifically end First Nations homelessness, then we have a different structure and system that would be built around that, which is part of the reason that we've talked about having a standalone First Nations housing and homelessness plan, because it's a different starting point for the question. So there's different systems that you then build around, both in prevention and response to homelessness, and hearing both Tina and Darren talk about the unique aspects of service delivery when it's delivered by Aboriginal community-controlled organisations. So having that come through in the national plan will be really important.
All right, and in closing, we did intend to have a Q&A session for 15-20 minutes, but no questions were allowed to be asked of me. But anyway. You didn't write that in there, you know. But we do have some nibblies outside, so we can do a bit of an informal Q&A, and anyone that wants to ask me anything out there, that'd be great, or anyone else. So thank you, everyone, and thanks for coming.